She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there like a storm that hadn't hit yet. It started with a laugh, one of those forced, smug chuckles that slither through a classroom when someone's about to do something cruel. Troy Miller, the golden boy of Lincoln High, leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. Star quarterback, Letterman jacket half-zipped. He wasn't just popular, he was untouchable. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Amara sat 2 rows ahead of him, close to the window, her back straight, her braids long and immaculate, swaying like threads of discipline. She wore her hoodie down today, not to hide, but because it was warm, and because she was finally starting to feel like she could just exist. But Troy didn't like it when people like her just existed. He leaned forward slowly, the sound of his chair scraping the linoleum drawing eyes from all corners of the room. Phones subtly lifted, smirks curled. The tension, so thin at first, suddenly became razor wire. Even the teacher, Mr. Keller, had left for a quick break, leaving a classroom full of teenagers unsupervised and dangerous. Troy's fingers reached for Amara's braids, slowly at first, then with intent. The boy next to him nudged him, chuckling. Under his breath, "Do it, bro. Make a statement." That's all he needed. In one motion. He pulled out a pair of scissors from his backpack, props for his speech class, and lunged forward. Snip. The sound was deceptively soft. But the silence that followed? Deafening. A thick section of Amara's braids dropped onto her desk like severed pride. Gasps filled the room. Some hands flew to mouths. Others hit record. Troy stood behind her, holding the braids like a trophy. His face twisted into a grin of triumph, cruelty blazing in his eyes. "This school," he announced, turning to the class like he was performing on stage, "is for whites." No one laughed this time. Amara rose slowly from her seat, not jerking, not rushing. She turned around, her eyes locking onto Troy's with the kind of silence that makes even the loudest mouths go dry. Her face was unreadable calm, focused. Yet something terrifying shimmered just beneath the surface. She looked at the braids in his hand. Then at him. And finally she said, in a voice low enough to hush the world, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The air in the room shifted. It wasn't rage that flowed from her, it was restraint. The kind of discipline that scares people more than fury. Troy blinked, his grin faltering for a second. Just a second. Someone at the back whispered, "Is she crying?" She wasn't. Not even close. Amara walked out of the room before the bell rang, her chin high, her hands loose by her side, the snipped braids still lying on her desk like a murder scene. And in that moment, the entire class knew something had changed. The whispers started before she made it halfway down the hallway. By lunch, the clip had already hit 1,000 shares on school group chats. Troy cuts black girl's braids in class. She didn't even flinch. Is she gonna fight him? She's crazy quiet, that's scary. But Amara? She didn't check her phone, didn't respond, didn't go to lunch. Instead, she went home early. She stood in her bathroom, the silence pressing in on her, and examined what was left of her hair. Her fingers brushed the uneven strands, the raw edge of the cut. She could still feel the scissors even now. Not on her scalp but in her chest. The weight of that moment, that humiliation, that message he tried to send. But the message didn't land, not the way Troy had hoped. Her uncle's voice echoed in her memory. "Control the rage. Channel it. The moment you react like they want you to, you've already lost." She didn't plan revenge. She planned a reckoning. Amara picked up the rest of her braids and laid them in a showbox. Then, with calm precision, she took the clippers from the cabinet and shaved the rest of her head clean. Not out of shame, not because she lost, but because she was done hiding. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. A girl with nothing left to lose. No shield, no fear, only fire. Tomorrow would not be like today. Tomorrow Troy Miller would learn what it meant to pick the wrong target. The walls of Amara's room were bare, no posters, no bright colors, no distractions. Just 4 corners, a steel pull-up bar, a shelf of books, and the faint scent of liniment that clung to the air like smoke after battle. The showbox with her braids sat on her desk like a funeral urn. She hadn't opened it since she closed the lid. It wasn't just hair. It was everything that moment tried to strip from her identity, pride, power. But if Troy thought she'd be broken, he clearly didn't know who he was dealing with. Lincoln High only saw the girl in the hoodie. The straightest student who kept her answers short and her eyes lower than most. What they didn't know, what Troy never even bothered to ask, was that Amara King didn't just survive hard days. She trained for them. As the sky outside turned amber with the dying sun, Amara packed her gym bag in silence. No headphones, no music, no escape, only focus. She tied her wraps with practice speed, her fingers moving on instinct, the rough fabric scraping against her knuckles like a handshake with pain. Downstairs, her uncle was already waiting. He stood beside his truck, arms folded, watching her with the same eyes he used in combat. Raymond King wasn't just her uncle. He was her guardian, her trainer, her compass. A man carved out of discipline and battle scars. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He saw it in her eyes. "Get in," he said simply. They drove in silence down South Division Street, past the closed-down arcades and the boarded-up shops that whispered stories of a town once full of life, but hidden in one. Of the old warehouses near the industrial lot was a place that didn't need signs or lights. The pit, that's what they called it. A concrete basement that smelled like sweat and survival. No gym mirrors, no fancy machines, just a cage, a mat, a ring of ropes, and the kinds of fighters who didn't believe in excuses. Most of them didn't even know Amara's real name. Around here, they called her Little Ghost. Not because she was soft, but because she struck before anyone saw her coming. Raymond unlocked the rusted metal door, the sound of fists hitting. Pads echoed like gunfire from inside. Amara stepped in. Heads turned, a few nods, one or two smirks, but mostly respect. She wasn't the strongest. She wasn't the fastest, but she was precise. And she didn't back down. She dropped her bag near the edge of the cage and started wrapping tighter, her muscles still sore from last week's session. One of the regulars, a tall Dominican girl named Letty, leaned against the post. "You okay?" Letty asked. Amara looked up. Her voice was low and steady. "I will be." Letty didn't ask more. That was the thing about fighters. They didn't pry. They waited until the punches did the talking. Raymond stepped into the center of the mat and clapped his hands. "Pair up, 5-minute rounds, 2-minute breaks. You want to cry, there's the door. You want to win, get in the ring." Amara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, cracked her neck once, and nodded toward Letty. The bell rang. 5 minutes of calculated fury followed. No trash talk, no hesitation, just fists, footwork, and precision. Amara moved like water slipping, weaving, countering. Letty came strong, but Amara came smarter. She took hits. She gave better ones. By the end of round 3, Raymond called it. "That's enough." Letty was breathing hard. Amara stood still, chest rising, eyes sharp. Raymond tossed her a towel and pulled her aside. "You're not fighting her. I know, you're fighting someone softer. I know that too." "Then why do I see murder in your eyes?" Amara held the towel but didn't wipe the sweat. "Because he didn't cut my hair. He tried to erase me." Raymond stared at her for a long time. Then he said something he hadn't said since she first stepped foot in the pit 3 years ago. "Then teach him what pain feels like." Back at home, Amara showered in silence. The hot water ran over her shaved scalp, stinging like truth. She dried off slowly, wrapped herself in her oldest hoodie, and sat at the edge of her bed with her hands folded like she was in prayer. But she wasn't praying. She was calculating. She knew Troy, knew his schedule, knew he worked out after school. Strutted the halls like a king, and thought pain was something only poor kids dealt with. He believed he was untouchable. Lincoln High protected boys like him, but not anymore. Tomorrow she would confront him, not with fists. Not yet. First, she would challenge him where he thought he was safest. His pride. She opened her notebook and scribbled one sentence across a clean page. "Meet me in the gym. No cameras, no crowd, just you and me." She folded the paper once. No name, no threat, just a promise. Then she smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been broken once and came back stronger. The next morning, the hallways of Lincoln High pulsed with tension. Word had already spread like wildfire. The video of Troy cutting Amara's braids had exploded overnight. Hundreds of students had seen it, some horrified, others entertained. But no one could stop talking about her, about how she didn't cry, how she didn't swing, how she walked out of the classroom like someone who already knew what was coming next. Now they were all waiting for what she would do. And then she arrived. Amara walked through the main entrance with her backpack slung low and her chin held high. But it wasn't just her posture that stopped everyone mid-sentence. It was her head, shaved clean. No hoodie, no hat, just bare skin, smooth and proud, glinting beneath the cheap fluorescent lights. Gasps followed her. Some students turned and whispered. Others moved out of the way without realizing they were doing it. Even the loud kids, the ones who always had something to say, stayed quiet, because Amara didn't look broken. She looked ready. Troy stood by his locker, surrounded by his usual crew. He saw her coming. His smirk twitched, but it didn't last long, because in her right hand, swinging gently at her side, was a clear plastic bag. Inside it, her cut braids, coiled like a trophy or a weapon. Their eyes met, no words, no pause. She kept walking, straight past him, straight to the gym. Basketball practice was already underway. The sharp squeak of sneakers on the polished floor echoed across the space. Troy's coach was barking orders at the players when the gym doors slammed open. Amara stepped inside. She walked across the floor like she belonged there, her boots tapping steady against the wood. Practice halted. Everyone froze, even the coach. Amara reached the center court, where the red paint of the school logo bled under her shoes. She knelt down, opened the bag, and laid the braids on the ground like sacred relics. Then she stood tall and turned to face them. Her voice didn't shout, but it cut. "Meet me here," she said. "After school, just you and me, Troy, one-on-one. No cameras, no crowd, no rules." Mouths dropped. A basketball thudded as it rolled away, forgotten. The coach tried to step forward, but no one moved fast enough to stop what had just been set in motion. Troy, who had jogged in late for practice, now stood near the benches. His expression flickered from confusion to mockery, to something else, something he didn't recognize yet, maybe fear. He tried to laugh it off. "This isn't a fight club, sweetheart," he sneered. "You want an apology that bad?" Amara stared through him. "I don't want an apology," she replied coldly. "I want a reckoning." Silence followed. Then someone in the back whispered, "She's serious." The coach stepped between them. "That's enough. You can't just walk in here and..." But Principal Jackson had already arrived, breathless, clearly called in by one of the staff. His eyes scanned the scene. Amara standing like a soldier on sacred ground. Troy frozen, the entire gym watching. With wide-eyed, Jackson spoke slowly, carefully. "Amara, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the way." She didn't turn her head. "This is the only way," she said. The principal opened his mouth to argue again, but Amara bent down and picked up her braids, clutching them with quiet grace. Then she looked at Troy. "After school, you show up. Or you prove to everyone that you're just a coward who picks on girls because he knows he can't handle a real fight." That line landed like a punch. Some of Troy's own teammates chuckled under their breath. Others backed away. Troy's jaw tightened. His ego had been cornered. And no one escapes clean from something like that. He crossed his arms. "Fine. You want to embarrass yourself in front of the whole school? Be my guest. No crowd," Amara repeated. "No phones, just me and you." And with that, she walked off the court. The rest of the day was a blur of tension. Every hallway conversation came back to the same thing, the challenge. No one had seen anything like it. A girl walking into the gym like she owned it, demanding a one-on-one showdown with the school's star athlete. It felt like a movie, but it was real. And it was happening today. By 7th period. Principal Jackson made a formal announcement banning any unauthorized gatherings after school. He said something about escalation and respectful resolution. But no one was listening, because everyone already knew the school wasn't in control anymore. She was. When the final bell rang, students didn't rush to the parking lot. They lingered. They circled the gym, pretending to forget something. They hid behind bleachers, peeking through glass windows. Some even sneaked into the rafters above the court. The gym lights were off, but Amara was already inside, waiting. She stood in the shadows near center court, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing even. The smell of the waxed floor mixed with distant echoes of sneakers and cheers from practices past. It was quiet now, sacred. The door creaked. Troy entered. No jacket, just a plain t-shirt and athletic shorts. His swagger had dulled, but his pride hadn't left him. He stepped into the gym like a man pretending not to be nervous. Amara didn't speak. She stepped into the light, and the challenge was no longer words. It was now a moment, and there was no turning back. The gym was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your heart beat louder than it should. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the polished floor. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Principal Jackson had made it clear in his announcement that there would be no gathering, no fight, no drama. But high school has never followed the rules. Hidden behind rafters, tucked into the stairwell, crouched behind gym mats, students waited, breath held, eyes sharp. They'd never seen anything like this before. Lincoln High had witnessed football brawls, hallway screaming matches, and even a cafeteria food fight that made the local news. But nothing like this. This wasn't about popularity. This was about power. At 3:07 p.m., the gym door creaked open. Troy stepped inside. He walked slowly, cautiously, not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't sure what to expect. Part of him still thought it was a bluff, some twisted performance, that she'd call him out and storm off for attention. But when he saw her barefoot, standing in the center of the court like a statue carved from silence, he knew this wasn't a show. This was real. Amara didn't move. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, shoulders relaxed, feet grounded. She wore no makeup, no accessories, nothing flashy. Just black sweatpants, a fitted tank, and the calm of someone who had already visualized every second of what was about to happen. Troy cracked his neck and gave a half laugh. "You sure you want to do this?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer, smirking. "You still mad about the hair thing?" "I said it was a joke." Still no response. That was the moment the air shifted. Because Troy expected fury. He expected her to yell, to curse, to rush him in blind rage like every fight he'd seen online. But Amara wasn't angry. She was focused. Troy threw the first punch. It came fast. A right hook aimed for her jaw, but Amara had already read it in his posture. She dipped beneath the swing with the grace of a trained fighter and used his own momentum against him. Her palm struck his ribcage hard enough to make him stumble. Before he could recover, she swept her foot low, catching his ankle and bringing him crashing to the floor. The sound of his body hitting the court echoed like a thunderclap. He scrambled to his feet, red-faced, confused. "You want to play dirty?" he growled. Amara stepped back, giving him space. Not out of kindness but out of strategy. Troy lunged again, this time faster, sloppier, like someone trying to prove they weren't scared. He went for a tackle, arms outstretched. Amara pivoted. Her elbow caught his temple mid-charge, snapping his head sideways. He collapsed again, this time slower. But she wasn't done. In one swift move, she dropped to the floor, hooked her legs around his arm, and locked in a submission hold so tight he couldn't breathe. The silence cracked. From the rafters above, someone gasped. Troy flailed. He bucked. He cursed. But the more he fought, the tighter her hold became. "Let go," he choked. Still, she didn't speak. He slammed his free fist against the court. "I said, let go." His voice cracked. She leaned in close, her voice steady and low enough only he could hear. "This is what silence feels like. Remember it." And then she let go, not because he earned it, but because she didn't need to finish it. She stood, calm and collected, while he rolled to his side, coughing, humiliated. His eyes searched the gym for help, for support, for escape. But there were no cheers. No teammates. No crowd. Because in the shadows above and around corners, students were frozen, watching, processing, recording not with phones but with memory. Amara walked over to where the red L of Lincoln High was painted on the floor and slowly bent down. From the pocket of her hoodie, she pulled out the clear plastic bag, the same one with her severed braids. She laid it gently in the center of the court. A tribute, a challenge, a warning. Troy finally sat up, wiping blood from his lip, his breath ragged. Amara looked at him one last time. "This school?" she said. "It's mine now." Outside, the sky had darkened with the weight of a storm. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, as if the world itself had witnessed the reckoning inside those gym walls. Amara exited the building alone. But she wasn't alone, because by the next morning, the whispers had become conversations. The students who watched in secret told their friends. The ones who hid with phones posted clips anyway. And within hours, Lincoln High wasn't talking about sports or prom anymore. They were talking about her, not as a victim, not as a girl with shaved hair, but as a force, a name that meant something now. Amara King, the girl who turned silence into a war cry and made a bully beg without ever raising her voice. The clip leaked by morning. Though Amara had asked for no cameras, some rules were never followed at Lincoln High, and for once she didn't mind. The footage was grainy, taken from the rafters, but it captured everything. Troy swinging and missing, Amara moving like she'd rehearsed every second, the brutal efficiency of her takedown, and the moment she dropped the bag of her own braids at center court. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Snapchat, Instagram, Reddit, then TikTok, where a 14-second edit went viral. Caption: "He cut her hair. She cut his pride." By noon, the school could no longer contain it. Teachers huddled in confused whispers. Parents called the office, demanding explanations. Some praised Amara's restraint. Others condemned the school's silence that led to the incident in the first place. And still, the students they watched as the system tried to process what had happened, watched as the bully became the example, watched as the girl they all thought was invisible stood taller than anyone ever had in those halls. Troy Miller was suspended. The official reason cited was violent provocation, racial intimidation, and unsafe conduct on school property. His parents threatened legal action, but even they knew it was a weak hand to play. The court of public opinion had already made its decision. He was the villain in a story that no longer needed explanation. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't post. She didn't even walk any differently. But the school changed around her. The stares were different now, not out of ridicule, but reverence. Boys who once laughed behind her back now lowered their eyes when she passed. Girls who had never spoken to her suddenly asked where she bought her boots. And those who had always known, always seen, always kept quiet, black and brown students who had grown used to surviving silently finally started speaking. It began in homeroom, where a Latina student named Solange stood up and told Mr. Keller that she was tired of teachers ignoring slurs in the hallway. It continued in the cafeteria, where a freshman Muslim girl removed her hijab in public for the first time, only to tie it back on her own terms and smile when no one dared comment. By Thursday, the student government hosted an emergency assembly. Principal Jackson stood stiffly behind the podium, reading from a scripted apology that tried and failed to capture the weight of what had happened. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to Amara, who had been quietly seated in the front row, and invited her to speak. She hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted her words to matter. She walked up, took the mic, and looked out at hundreds of eyes, some apologetic, some angry, many uncertain. And then she said, "I didn't fight to be famous. I fought because I got tired of being polite to people who hurt me." A murmur passed through the gym. Every time we're told to calm down, to walk away, to ignore it, we carry that pain. I just stopped carrying it. She paused, scanning the faces. This isn't about a haircut or a fight. It's about who gets to feel safe, who gets to be heard, and who gets to be seen. Silence. Then a single clap, then another, until the gym erupted. After that day, things didn't become perfect, but they became different. Teachers attended new workshops on cultural bias. The dress code was revised to allow protective hairstyles without restriction. And perhaps most symbolic of all, the showbox of Amara's cut braids, once a symbol of humiliation, was mounted in a shadow box and hung in Principal Jackson's office beside a plaque that read, "Silence is never strength. Speak, stand, rise, students." Began calling it the crownbox.it wasn't a trophy.it was a reminder.it home. Amara remained unchanged. She still trained, still studied, still walked to school with her chin high and her hands in her hoodie pocket. But there was something different in her eyes now, less guarded, more grounded. She no longer shrank in crowded hallways. She didn't need to. She'd already proved who she was, and who she would never be again. One evening, as she was drying dishes beside her uncle, Raymond looked at her and asked, "You good?" Amara thought about it. Then she nodded. "I'm more than good. I'm done hiding." Raymond didn't smile, but his eyes softened, and in that silence, she felt everything. He didn't say. Weeks passed. Spring turned to summer. Graduation loomed. Troy never returned. Rumors swirled about therapy, private school, relocation, but no one really cared anymore. His absence didn't matter, because the story had already shifted. Amara's name was etched into Lincoln High's story, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. Teachers quoted her in classrooms. Students carried her courage into their own battles. And for once, the quiet ones, the overlooked, the outcasts, the ones who'd been cut down in ways no one ever saw, walked a little taller, because they had seen what happened when one of their own finally said, "Enough." And Amara, she never asked for justice. She became it. She didn't win by fighting. She won by refusing to stay small. By making the world see her not as a problem, not as a victim, but as the storm. And long after the last bell rang and the school year ended, her story remained not just in videos or whispered rumors, but in every student who learned that silence isn't strength, and that dignity, when defended fiercely, can change everything, forever.